This morning first session is going to be a slightly more casual presentation of maybe some of the more intricate things we're working on in terms of simulating microcombs. So I'm just going to talk for a few minutes about what I'm doing. I'll forget that. Where is the timer? There it is. Okay, good. Right. The background, oh, well, you'll see that later. Okay, so brief recap. Do you all remember, do you all have a vague idea of how dissipative solitons work and how they exist in the microresonator? I guess we covered that yesterday. Yep. Okay, so the thing is, the soliton, it relies on, basically, its continued existence relies on the parametric gain from the Kerr nonlinearity, like right here, because the Kerr nonlinearity is very fast on femtosecond timescales, so the gain of the soliton appears very fast on these femtosecond timescales. This is what sets a dissipative Kerr soliton apart from a let's say a pulse that's generated in a mode-locked laser, where a pulse generated in a mode-locked laser absorbs the entire gain of a kind of more of a long-term amplified gain medium inside a cavity. But a dissipative soliton, on the other hand, receives gain only from right here. So this has resulted in the fact in experimental work so far of dissipative Kerr soliton-based microcombs. Here's an example of a 14 gigahertz microcomb in a magnesium fluoride ring resonator. And here's an example of an octave-spanning 1 terahertz microcomb in a silicon nitride cavity. Something you might notice about both of them in all soliton-based microcombs is that there's always this enormous spiky pump line in the middle, right? There and there. And this is, well, it's a consequence of the fundamental physics of the system, basically. Soliton-based microcombs, because of the high Q, they have a nice low threshold energy of pump power in order to get going. However, because of this inefficiency I'm kind of hinting at, there's usually a limited number of lines you can actually make. And high repetition rates are most efficient. I'll show you in more of a spatial diagram later. But that's why this 14 gigahertz microcomb is extremely inefficient, as you can see by that pump line in the middle. The 1 terahertz one is a bit more efficient, but this only accounts for about 200 comb lines, whereas the top one is about 500 comb lines. We would like to make thousands of comb lines, really, in the future. Now, the total, the other method of on-chip frequency comb formation, which is also ongoing in many groups, and obviously, I talked all about this yesterday, which is supercontinuum generation. So as I said yesterday, that exploits an extremely high intensity input pulse in order to just non-linearly broaden in just a single pass of some waveguide. So because of that reason, supercontinuum generation it requires a very high input pulse energy or pulse peak power, and because of that reason, it's very efficient at low repetition rates, hundreds of megahertz, or even less. Recent works have done a gigahertz supercontinuum, but they had to have like amplifier, compression, amplifier, then the supercontinuum. Basically, like they had to compress their input pulse, amplify it again, compress it, amplify it again, and then they finally got enough peak power in order to get the supercontinuum. So there's this divide between Kerr soliton-based microcomb formation and pulse-driven supercontinuum generation. So my my latest project has been more about what if we could kind of have a hybrid technique of this. So, oh yeah, okay. So here's my explanation of this. So okay, the top one is a bit faded, but the top one depicts, let's say, a terahertz resonator with high dispersion and one dissipative soliton in it. Now, as I said before, the soliton receives energy only from its actual overlap with the pump, which is the red line. So you can see that the top one is pretty efficient. But this is the frequency cone that it forms. You can see that the pump line isn't too big, but it's just only got like 20 lines. But so if we wanted 1,000 comb lines, this corresponds to this situation, where we have a resonator that has a very low normalized dispersion, allowing an extremely narrow pulse to be formed. But because the energy of that pulse is, relies on the overlap of this pump, I mean, this is really inefficient, as you can imagine by just looking at this and just looking at this. And this has always been a problem for us, particularly because, and this could be modeled, it used to be, but you noticed in the scans over resonance we were doing yesterday that the cavity first goes through this state of chaos, quite a high energy state of chaos, and then it kind of drops into a multi-soliton state. Did you guys remember seeing that yesterday? Yeah. Now, going from there to there entails quite a huge change in internal thermal energy, and that huge change in internal thermal energy. Well, the huge change in energy changes the temperature of the resonator quite a lot, and the change in temperature of the resonator actually changes the resonance frequency quite a lot suddenly, and that could actually then just destabilize your soliton formation process and basically just kick you out of the soliton existence regime, and then all the solitons collapse instantly. And this has always been a big problem. This has always been a big problem for resonators where you need a high power in order to make solitons. And in this sort of situation, because the cavity is large, you need a high power to energize it. So this is our conventional picture. So we thought, okay, well, if we want one soliton, then we could just pump with a kind of a pre-sculptured pulsed pump, and then this pulse is resonant, is spatially resonant as well inside the resonator, and it energizes a single soliton much more efficiently. And so this is the field as we're scanning into resonance. Basically, a tiny Turing pattern forms and then immediately converts to a soliton, and that's real simple. And so this is so since we're entering in a pulse into a waveguide, it's kind of like supercontinuum generation, except there's a ring cavity to enhance and resonate the pulse. So it's kind of like resonant supercontinuum generation. So this is what I mean by it's kind of like a hybrid technique between conventional CW-driven microcombs and pulse-driven supercontinuum. It's basically both. This was done recently in these little fiber cavities that are about this big, where a group adjacent to ours put in 2 picosecond pulses, which were then smoothly converted really efficiently into one real smooth soliton frequency comb. We do this in the lab by actually basically creating our pulse train out of just massive phase modulation of a seed laser. We basically take one seed laser, phase modulate it massively, just really a huge amount, make all these comb lines out of it. Then we just put all those comb lines through some dispersion this chirps the waveform a lot. This makes the waveform, well, phase modulated. But then going through some dispersion undoes the chirp and compresses the waveform into a nice picosecond pulse. And we could control the repetition rate of that pulse, to finally tune it to 14 gigahertz or 20 gigahertz or something like that. And so then we pulse a silicon nitride cavity with those pulses. This is an example of an experimental result I got, where here's the input pulsed pump. So it's not just one line now; it's 25 lines, and it's been efficiently converted to a single soliton state, which has about 2,200 lines, which is a relative, I believe, is a record in the domain of this type of bandwidth of kind of 1,400 to 2,000 nanometers. So that was pretty good. It could also make if I made 2 or 3 solitons on top of that pulse. That also occurred, and you get this modulated pattern that corresponds to having 2 or 3 solitons in the cavity. But it couldn't do more than 3 solitons in the cavity, even though if I drove the cavity CW, I would have got 100 solitons. But I just got 3 very efficiently. And I'll show you a simulation of that in a second. Also really conveniently is if the input pulse repetition rate is not entirely synchronized to the cavity repetition rate, this pulse kind of circles the cavity in an unsynchronized manner. But luckily, the soliton, in fact, follows it around, actually, within a certain range. So we're able to kind of tune the rep rate of the whole soliton microcomb in a small range of a few kilohertz. So I'm just going to show you some simulations that kind of maybe, I guess, just show you what I'm talking about. So these simulations are they're split-step-based simulations that I've coded, except I've done them in MATLAB. I haven't done them in Python. If you're very interested in them, I could show you them. They're also they're relatively optimized for speed. So if I just run this scan to just refresh your memory. So this is us scanning over resonance. Oh shoot, can you see that? Maybe we need to shut the windows or the blinds. Can you see the bottom panel? Okay. Well, either way, it went through the chaotic phase and made these stable solitons, which are now growing in energy, and now they are going to collapse. Okay, well, here's the recap anyway, and you saw this yesterday. Now that's not so bad, but basically we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 solitons in a kind of a random formation, which is a random formation, and it's not very energy efficient because we've pumped the entire field, so the conversion efficiency from the pump to the solitons is not too good. So what if we do pulse driving? Pulsed. Can we just turn the lights off? It's terrible. Yeah. I think it is. I don't know. I can't see anything. Oh, that's good. Slightly better, I think.
Should I turn the other ones off too? Turn off.
Okay. No, turn that one off. Okay, so all I've done, okay, this script is very similar to the script we were looking at in Python yesterday, just lots of setting up of all the grids and values. But I basically, I have replaced my input pump with a sync pulse. Instead of, usually the input pump is a CW line, but I've replaced it with a sync pulse, basically. So if I run that. So this is the same scan. So solitons are forming within the pulse envelope. There's one breathing soliton, and then it stabilizes, and then it locks to the edge of the pulse. And this is, as you can kind of see from the comb, it looks a bit more, the conversion efficiency looks a bit better. Yeah. And here's the recap of that. Basically, modulation and stability or Turing patterns form at first, then they destabilize, and then they collapse into a nice single soliton. And just to demonstrate that synchronization effect, if I do it again, what if I make this bigger? No, I can't. See, the background pulse is now moving to the left. It's moving to the left. And OK, good. Then the soliton locks to it and actually follows along. Now, if the red pulse was moving too fast to the left, then the soliton would break and leave. Yeah, and so you can see that here. It vaguely follows along. And that's very useful experimentally. A more realistic experimental example. OK, so that simulation I just ran was all in normalized dimensionless parameters. But here's one that's based on an actual microcomb that I've got in the lab that I'm working on, which is 14 gigahertz, which is, so it's in terms of a silicon nitride ring, it's very large. It takes up almost the whole chip we make. Because normally the silicon nitride microcombs we make are like 200 gigahertz or 100 gigahertz. This one's just 14 gigahertz. So it's quite large. So if you were to CW drive it, you would get this. So okay, here's the Turing roll formation happening. And look, it makes like 200 pulses, which now are destabilizing. So you can't see them individually because there's about like 200 of them. And then they'll collapse into the soliton state in a moment. Here we go. Then they collapse into the individual soliton regime, and then stabilize. And there's like 100 solitons there. So that's extremely chaotic. Thermally, this would not even work in the lab because the system would, based on the thermal instability, the whole system would kind of collapse, and you wouldn't even get that. Here's the recap of the overall scan. Here we go. So you can see a replay of it, where it's very rich. But if we do pulse driving instead, here's the input pulse spectrum. And we can make that, like I said, from just intense phase modulation of a pump. And this here we go. Look, I made it bigger. This more efficiently just converts to just well, oh look, just one soliton. Please stay. That was a live simulation, you see. Okay. Okay, but anyway, it seems I might have been driving with power that might have been too high just then. But okay, up until this point, it efficiently forms into a single soliton state. And yeah, that's oh well, this is the frequency comb that it would have made anyway. So it's about 170 to 220. Well, that's mostly. So this is the one we formed experimentally. This one has a dispersive way as we've discussed, but it's much the same as the one I just simulated, basically. So Well, for now, that's 9:30. Do you guys have any questions about this sort of thing? I guess does the aim of the project kind of make sense to you? Oh, that's good. That's good. Is there anything else you'd like me to do a simulation of? I don't know. Like any question?
Power of this one.
Sorry?
Can we reduce the power of this one?
Reduce? Yes.
Like this.
Yes. Yeah. We can. Let me see. Power level. It's down here. It is. Well, okay. Maybe the pulse is too narrow. Well, either way, okay. I think this was something I was working on, actually, to be honest. I could show you the real comb that it's based on is over here. If the server is on. Oh, hurry up. 2019. I'm pretty sure it's here. Oh, no, it's actually in the other one. I'll show you. Here it is. X6, low FSR one. Here we go. This is the real frequency comb I made in the lab, which I was just simulating the equivalent version of, basically. So we have this 14 gigahertz silicon nitride ring resonator. We pulse it with, here's the input frequency comb, and it turns into a nice one smooth soliton with a very high efficiency. I think this has well, the blue one at the back has an conversion efficiency of like 30%, which is just really good. Usually the conversion efficiency of any other equivalent comb would be about 0.5% or less, basically. Yep. The blue is the through port, and the red is the drop port at the back of the resonator. So that's why it looks a bit different. Yeah. Oh, well, any questions? I think it all sort of straightforward. Okay, well then in that case, I might hand over to my colleague Wenla, possibly, who is going to talk a bit about, I guess, his research too.